In the headlines, Korea details new taxes on large corporate cash reserves as it tries to channel corporate money into higher wages and dividends to boost growth. Samsung Electronics and Apple call a truce and agree to drop all patent lawsuits outside of the U.S. market. And the World Health Organization is set to discuss whether to call the latest Ebola outbreak a public health emergency of international concern and inject its resources to help contain it.
It's 10 p.m. here in Korea and coming to you live from Seoul. I'm Sean Lim.
And I'm Kang Chae-rae. Welcome to Primetime News. Thanks for joining us tonight. To fight sluggish growth, the Korean government is moving forward with its sort of creative plan to use taxes this time. Its first target will be large corporate cash reserves.
The administration wants to reward companies for raising wages, boosting dividends, and pursuing new investment opportunities. Ji Myung-gil reports on the plan to let cash hoards flow into households.
The Park Geun-hye administration is proposing a tax revision, putting pressure on large conglomerates to use their cash reserves on investments, paying out dividends, and raising the wages of their employees. Instead of hoarding that cash, the government would like to see it flow into households as a way to boost domestic consumption. Under the government's proposal for a tax revision that goes into effect next year, the government will provide a 5 to 10% tax deduction for companies that raise employee salaries with extra incentives for firms that take additional measures. The dividend tax will be cut to 9% from the current 14% if dividend payouts meet certain targets. The government will impose a 10% tax on the portions of cash reserves that are deemed excessive.
We hope the companies spend their net profits on investment, salaries, and dividends.
The idea of taxing the internal reserves of companies has not been met with kindly by the business community. They contend that many of the businesses have been setting aside earnings for a rainy day. Even if companies increase their dividends to avoid taxes on their cash reserves, they say the impact would not meet expectations for increasing domestic investment and consumption. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
Another downgrade on Korea's 2014 growth forecast. The Korea Institute of Finance projects the Korean economy to grow 3.9%, which is 0.2 percentage points lower than the last one. The think tank cited a slower than expected recovery stemming from a slow pickup in the U.S. and China. Korea's slow domestic demand further dampened following April's ferry disaster, which was another culprit. The KIF also changed its stance on further monetary easing, saying the sentiment needs to be managed as well. The Bank of Korea holds its rate meeting next Thursday.
The recent slowdown of exports to China is setting off alarms for trade officials in Korea, as China is Korea's largest trading partner. But some analysts say the crisis could actually serve as an opportunity for some. Kim Ji-yeon tells us who.
The rate of increase in Korea's exports to China is slowing as local Chinese companies are producing cheaper products. Up until now, a majority of Korean exports to China were in the form of intermediate trade, goods in which the product is reprocessed and consumed in the import country. Steel, machinery, and petrochemicals fall in that category, and it's why analysts like Lee Bong-gol from the Korea International Trade Association have emphasized the need to diversify the country's exports, to shift the focus toward consumer goods or products that can be purchased for use by the average Chinese consumer.
We have to look closely into the recent growth policies and paradigm shifts made by the Chinese government. In the wake of the global financial crisis in 2008, Beijing is trying to develop its domestic market to boost consumption rather than becoming a big factory for exports.
027 Incorporated, a Korean clothing manufacturer for toddlers, is an example of one company that's taking advantage of Beijing's growth policies. It has sales of around $236 million last year and is currently doing business with more than 200 stores across China.
We expect the demand for baby products to increase in China as the government gradually relaxes its one-child policy.
Consumer goods to China from January to May this year increased more than 9% compared to the same period last year, promising signs for Korean industries who are trying to survive in the increasingly competitive global market. Kim Jeon, Arirang News.
After 3 years of patent battles raged around the world, Samsung Electronics and Apple appear to be laying down their weapons.
The smartphone rivals have agreed to drop all lawsuits against each other except for those in the United States. Park Ji-won has the details.
Samsung and Apple agreed to drop all litigation cases between them in all countries, except for in the United States. That means some 30 lawsuits will be dropped in courts in 8 countries, including Korea, Japan, Germany, and France. However, the joint statement released Wednesday says the agreement does not cover any cross-licensing arrangements between the two smartphone rivals. The lawsuits between the world's 2 biggest smartphone makers began in 2011 when Apple sued Samsung for copying iPhone features. Samsung responded by countersuing Apple for infringing its wireless transmission technology. The patent trials have since spread to courts around the globe. The mutual rapprochement began in May when Samsung and Apple agreed to drop lawsuits related to Motorola mobility. 1 month later, they agreed to dismiss their appeals of a patent case at the U.S. International Trade Commission. This week's agreement leaves just 2 cases pending in the U.S., both currently in the appeals process. In May, a jury ordered Samsung to pay Apple some $120 million in damages. It also ordered Apple to pay some $160,000 to Samsung for patent infringements. In a separate case in a U.S. court in 2012, a jury verdict ordered Samsung to pay Apple $930 million. Both cases are currently being appealed. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
And to talk more about the Samsung-Apple agreement, patent attorney Kim Sanghee is joining us tonight on the phone. Thank you so much for joining us today. What do you think is at play here for these 2 tech giants to take a step back, sort of, from 3 years of legal hostilities?
I think they already spent more than 3 years to fight each other. Now they recognize that the legal battle in other jurisdictions than in the U.S. has less significance. So now it's time both of them to agree. We will make a decision or settlement based on the U.S. decision.
So are you saying that you think this is sort of their reaction to the reality that their products are becoming highly commoditized and their Chinese competitors are really making their names for it?
Right. The market has been opened by Apple and soon followed by Samsung. But now many other competitors are coming to the market, and they need to keep the price or market further. Otherwise, their share in the market will decrease very rapidly. So they need to go forward together rather than fighting each other.
So they're keeping, though, their one legal fight in the U.S. Market. Why do you think that is? Is it because of the fact that the U.S. market is the biggest smartphone market?
Clearly, the U.S. market is the largest and biggest. And the second one, their settlement or their agreement in other jurisdictions can be finalized based on the U.S. decision. So they need some reference to make their final settlement. That's the U.S. court decision.
So you're saying the other cases in other countries are dropped for the moment in order to take a look at what happens in the U.S. court.
Right.
Okay. And this agreement does not exactly involve a cross-licensing agreement, as have been tossed around as a possibility by industry observers. Should we read this as a step that falls a little short of a cross-licensing deal?
Yes. Without cross-licensing deal, their agreement is not complete. So only after they reached agreement on the cross-licensing, they can be rested. Otherwise, anytime they can initiate another legal battle. Just a few months ago, the second round of U.S. legal battle has been initiated.
So a cross-licensing deal is a strategy often used in patent disputes so that they don't really have to sue each other anymore or be suspicious of each other for stealing technology. But do you think that they will actually ever reach a cross-licensing deal? What is in it for them to agree on that front?
I think they are based on quite different technology platform, but to agree on cross-licensing, they have to look back and how they divide the cost up to now. That's one of the quite big parts of the final settlement. So that means cross-licensing means who pays for what. So that's not only just for the future, but for the back in the past use. So they're now discussing how they divide the past cost for the legal battle. So they need to develop further how to divide their cost for the past legal battle. That's the key for the future agreement.
All right, President Kim, thank you so much for your insight and time tonight.
It's my pleasure.
Curry's comments came in response to
your gateway to the day's biggest stories in Korea and around the world. Breaking news, the hottest interviews, and a whole lot more. Join Arirang Sean Lim and Kang Chae-ri from the heart of Seoul.
Begins now.
Primetime news, weeknights, live at 10 on Arirang TV.
President Park Geun-hye's emphasized the importance of character building in education as Korea is reeling from recent bullying scandals involving Korean soldiers. The president said character building is one of the fundamental solutions for tackling current social issues in Korea, such as bullying and violence at schools. And in a related development, the Army is launching a special task force on reforming Korea's military culture. The Army says the task force will consist of officers, government officials, and civilian experts who will come up with a plan to combat bullying in the military by the end of this year.
The U.S. State Department has said many times in the past Japan's wartime sexual slavery is a serious violation of human rights. But now Washington wants Tokyo to accept historic facts and take responsibility. Our Shin Se-min explains.
The United States is urging Japan to resolve the issue of its wartime system of sex slavery and take responsibility for its past atrocities.
We encourage Japan to continue to address this issue in a manner that promotes healing and facilitates better relations with neighboring states.
The State Department confirmed a report on Tuesday that White House and State Department representatives held closed-door interviews with Lee Hyuk-sun and Kang Il-chul, two Korean victims of Japan's sex slavery system, to discuss their experiences. Emphasizing that it wasn't the first face-to-face meeting between the women and U.S. officials, the spokesperson said Washington was open to holding similar meetings again in the future.
It is deplorable and clearly a grave human rights violation of enormous proportions that the Japanese military was involved in the trafficking of women for sexual purposes in the 1930s and 1940s.
Citing a spokesman at the U.S. National Safety Council, Korea's Yonhap News Agency also reports the two women met with the officials from the White House Office of Public Engagement. However, the names of the officials who met with the women have not been disclosed. Lee Hyuk-sun and Kang Il-chul are currently traveling around the U.S., taking part in memorial events remembering the victims of Japan's historical wrongdoings. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
And add to that, another high-profile voice on Japan's atrocities. UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Navi Pillay sternly criticized Japan's approach to the issue of its wartime sexual slavery. She said in a statement on Wednesday that the human rights of its victims have been infringed even now, decades after the end of World War II. Pillay also urged Japan to resolve the issue from a comprehensive and impartial approach. The Korean government, meanwhile, also urged Japan to take sincere reflection and responsible measures to resolve the sensitive matter.
The World Health Organization is convening an emergency summit to determine whether this latest outbreak of Ebola has become an international health crisis.
With more, we now turn to Paul Yee at the News Center. Paul, this fatal disease has already claimed the lives of some 900 people in West Africa, and fears are growing that the virus may spread to other parts of the world.
That's right, and in order to address those concerns, health experts from around the globe are set to hold talks in the next couple days in Geneva to get the outbreak under control. Senior officials from the WHO said this rare meeting was aimed at introducing concrete measures to tackle the epidemic, but it's still unclear if those will include international travel and trade restrictions. This as 5 new confirmed cases of Ebola have emerged in Nigeria. Our Kim Min-ji reports.
The World Health Organization is set to discuss whether to designate this latest Ebola outbreak as a public health emergency of international concern. If the verdict after a 2-day emergency committee meeting starting Wednesday is yes, the committee will recommend that the Director General of the WHO declare it as such. The UN body would then implement temporary measures to keep the virus from spreading internationally. The health organization says more than 1,600 people have been infected in the current outbreak and that the number killed is nearing 900. But there are fears that the actual death toll could be much higher than the WHO figures suggest. Voices among the world's leading Ebola specialists are calling on the WHO to make experimental drugs available to victims in West Africa. 2 American citizens who were flown home after being infected with the virus are reportedly recovering after being administered with an experimental drug called ZMapp. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
And over in the Gaza Strip, a 72-hour ceasefire that went into effect on Tuesday has continued to hold as thousands of Palestinians return to their homes in the war-torn region. Crews have taken to the streets to repair heavily damaged power and communication lines amid fears a humanitarian truce may collapse at any time. This as a delegation of Arab foreign ministers says it will visit Gaza to assess the reconstruction efforts. Our Connie Lee has this report.
The gunfire has gone silent in the Gaza Strip as the 72-hour ceasefire continues. But the clock is ticking. With the truce set to expire Friday morning, Israeli and Palestinian officials have been sent to Cairo for talks, with Egypt acting as mediator. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, speaking to the BBC, urged both sides to negotiate a 2-state solution. Meanwhile, in the Gaza Strip, the 3-day ceasefire is a brief window of opportunity for the residents to take in the devastation, stock up on supplies, and recover their dead.
Found destruction everywhere. A mosque, Quran books, decomposed children were found under the rubble after 5 days. Public buildings that used to serve people were destroyed.
UNICEF, the children's body of the United Nations, says more than 400 Palestinian children have been killed since the beginning of the conflict, with more than 140 schools damaged or destroyed in less than a month. Along with the truce, Israel said it has withdrawn all of its ground forces, but according to a military spokesperson, the troops are still on the border, ready in defensive positions.
We are taking a defensive stand. We are there in order to prevent further infiltration and further attacks from Gaza, originating from Gaza.
About a quarter of Gaza's population is now displaced, and more than 1,900 Palestinians have been killed in the month-long conflict. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
And finally, police in the U.S. state of Texas have arrested a convicted sex offender after Google tipped off authorities that he had child pornography on his computer. Houston police said the online search giant had notified the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children after detecting explicit pictures of a young girl in an email sent by John Henry Skillern through his Gmail account. The 41-year-old man has since been charged with possession of and promoting child pornography. Amid rising privacy concerns, Google has defended its monitoring of millions of its users for child sexual abuse. It explained that special technology is used to digitally tag and identify images such as children. Google said it's common practice among internet companies and that no other criminal activity is targeted with this technology. And that wraps up our look at international stories making headlines around the world. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Welcome to sports. Starting off with the FIFA Under-20 Women's World Cup in Toronto, Canada. North Korea played against their first Group A opponent, Finland. 15 minutes into the game, striker Kim Soo-hyang heads the ball in for the first goal. 10 minutes later, midfielder Chae Yoon-kyung strikes with a mid-range shot right into net, putting them up 2-0. A minute later, Finland retaliates with their own mid-range shot to score a goal. But North Korea dominates on the field, keeping Finland scoreless in the second half, ending the game 2-1. North Korea will face Ghana for the second preliminary match on Saturday. Kicking it off over to the K-League Classic, Jeonbuk Hyundai Motors faced off against Suwon Samsung in Cheonju. In the 23rd minute, Jeonbuk striker Lee Dong-guk stuffs in a goal, gaining the lead. But Suwon answers back in the 44th minute with Yeom Gi-hoon striking a goal to tie the game 1-1. In the second half, Suwon gets on top with a 62nd minute goal from Kim Do-hyun. But Jeonbuk fires back with 2 goals within 5 minutes by Hwang Yu-won and Lee Dong-guk with the second goal of the game, ending the match 3-2, Jeonbuk. Now over to baseball. Let's take a look at Wednesday's KBO matchup between the NC Dinos and the Lotte Giants in Busan. Starting the pitching game, Lee Sung-min for the NC Dinos and Song Seung-jun for the Lotte Giants. With a slow start, NC gets on board first, and the third inning with Na Sung-bum hitting a double and a couple of singles makes the score 3-0. But Lotte answers right back in the bottom of the third with bases loaded, hits 3 singles and a walk to jump ahead 4-3. Currently, Lotte is leading in the 8th inning, 8-4. Checking out other games, Samsung and Hana are tied in the 10th, 2-2. 2 games, Kia versus Tucson and SK versus Nixon, have been canceled due to rain. Moving on to the hard court, the NBA's first female has been picked as assistant coach for the San Antonio Spurs. Spurs head coach Greg Popovich says he appointed WNBA player Becky Hammon as a new assistant coach for her strengths in basketball IQ, work ethic, and interpersonal skills. Hammon announced last month that after this season, she'll retire as a player for the San Antonio Stars. She's led the team as the all-time leader in assists and three-pointers and ranks 4th in the franchise history in points, with over 3,400 in 218 games. Well, that wraps it up. This has been Kim Hyun-bin. Stay tuned for more updates from the world of sports.
Good evening, I'm Michelle Park here with the latest weather forecast. Now, the rain has mostly tempered off in the areas across the nation. However, we're expecting another round of showers tomorrow, reaching up to 5 to 10 millimeters in the central region and Gangwon, the province, and between 10 to 40 millimeters elsewhere. And tomorrow is Ipju here in Korea, which is the first day of autumn based on the lunar calendar. But with the heat wave advisory still in effect and the tropical night and storm down south, is still feeling very much like summer. Now, meanwhile, Typhoon Halong is headed for the south coast of Okinawa, Japan, and will then likely track westwards, eventually affecting Jeju Island and the southern regions of Korea by the weekend, bringing heavy rain and strong winds. Now going over to our temperature readings. Seoul will top out the Thursday morning at 23 before reaching up to 30 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will both top to 29 degrees. And moving over to other regions, Jeju Island tops to 30, while Dokdo hits 24, while Mankumgang tops to 27. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park, and have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, Michelle. And that's Primetime News on this Wednesday. I'm Kang Chae-ri.
I'm Sean Lim. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon. Good night.